Okay, it's that time of night where we talk about all things Nintendo. You are watching slash listening to the Nightly Nintendo Show, a daily broadcast, or rather nightly broadcast, where every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday night, we talk and discuss and react to the latest Nintendo headlines, stories, whatever scuttlebutt is going around in the house of Mario. That's what we're about. Typically, we're live on Twitch at 4:30, but occasionally we have those off days where we have to push it a bit later into the night. I think it works, right? Because we are the nightly Nintendo show. It makes sense that we could be a little bit later. Like today, we are at 8 p.m. Eastern time, by the way. If you can't watch the show live, no big deal. It posts on YouTube immediately afterwards, or as fast as YouTube allows the processing speeds, and it can be found on podcasting services like iTunes and Spotify. So whatever is your flavor of choice, you can listen to the Nightly Nintendo Show wherever you please, except it is probably best to enjoy the show live because you get to be part of the conversation. That's right, as we go through the news stories that I have collected but I haven't really went into yet. I haven't reacted to those stories because I want to react with you guys. You can join in the conversation. You can give your opinions, your thoughts, your criticisms. Maybe you absolutely hate what I have to say and you want to prove me wrong. This is your chance to do so. Today, no surprise, we have a lot more information about Pokemon Sword and Shield. That's because the review embargo lifted this morning about like 9 a.m. Eastern. So a lot of information, pretty much all the information you could ever want about Pokemon Sword and Shield, it's out in the wild. I would advise you to not watch the stream if you're interested in completing and not having any spoilers. Of course, I'm not going to go into spoilers directly, but there are a couple things that are leaked out that maybe you didn't want to know, although I have already looked over the news for the day. I don't think there's anything that's major, but if you want to go in completely blank, then yeah, probably don't want to watch this live stream. Maybe watch the YouTube video and get the timestamps after that. And we have some good news at the end here, but most of this is about Pokemon Sword and Shield. So let's dive into the news.
Well, the wait is over. This is Nintendo DS. My body is ready.
We would like to play.
A way to make 3D games a reality, and it's called the Wii U Game Pen.
Okay, the latest controversy of the day in the world of Pokemon Sword and Shield. If you don't know about all the previous controversies, I'm not going to spend time going through all of them because there's just way too many. You can check out yesterday's show. Again, you can find that on YouTube. You can just type in Nightly Nintendo Show or on the Heart Containers YouTube channel. That's where it gets posted, where we talked about some of the controversies, but they don't seem to end for Game Freak or Pokemon Sword and Shield, especially now that the game is out there. It's in the wild. People can talk about it. At least the reviewers can talk about it, and we can play it. Us average gamers can play it on Friday when it actually releases to the rest of the general public. Well, apparently the leak of the day is that the models that they're using in Pokemon Sword and Shield are apparently reused from older versions. Data miners are ripping the models and comparing them to other games, Sword and Shield, Black and White, basically, is what they're comparing it to. And what they're finding out is that these models, they look the same. Here's a Bulbasaur sketch. I'm assuming, oh, okay, here they're saying white is Sword and Shield, black is Sun and Moon, actually. I said that wrong. So this is the Sword and Shield model for Bulbasaur. This is the Sun and Moon model for Bulbasaur, and they're trying to point out that this is literally exactly the same. It's hard to argue against that because it is the same. You can see, I mean, maybe there are some small tweaks hidden in there, but there's no denying that even if they redid these models, they didn't spend that much time on redoing them. So I think the reason why this is so significant and this is garnering so much attention, this is nearly 24,000 people on Reddit upvoting this, is because one of the reasons why they had or made that controversial decision earlier in the year to not include all of the Pokemon from previous generations in this game, also known as National Dexgate, if that's more your style, is because they talked about the difficulties of bringing all the Pokemon over. And one of those they mentioned specifically were the 3D models, was bringing over and reanimating the Pokemon for the new generations and what they could do with that. And it was brought up back then when this conversation was happening that why couldn't you just take the models that were already made for other games, Sun and Moon being a prime example of that, because Sun and Moon did support all of the Pokemon. Therefore, Sun and Moon had to have a model for every single Pokemon in the franchise. So why can't you use those models? Well, the argument was being made by Game Freak that that's not what they're doing. They're doing something new. It's going to be more labor intensive, resource intensive. At least that's the angle that they took, which is why there's so much of an uproar. Okay, about these models and why they're so similar. Here's a triangle count, basically how many triangles are in these models to compare, just to make sure if the pictures weren't enough, the polygons here, the numbers are ridiculously close. I mean, look at this Clefairy number. It's almost identical. It's off by 2. So I can see why people would be upset. Coming from an engineering background, I know that it's not that simple. It's not as simple as just taking the models from the older versions and plugging them into the newer versions. There are definitely hidden things that probably aren't being talked about by Game Freak. Not trying to give them a free pass on this one, just trying to play devil's advocate a little bit on here, because I see this and I also get that gut reaction of, hey, this isn't cool. Game Freak, what are you doing to us? You said that this was not going to be an issue when apparently it is. But I will give them the benefit of the doubt here on Modelgate, the latest controversy, where it's probably not just the models. It's just slightly suspicious that they specifically talked about the models at some point, and now here we go and find out that some of them do seem directly ripped off from previous generations of Pokemon. I maintain that although some of the design decisions that Game Freak has made with Sword and Shield are just ridiculous, referring specifically to yesterday, one of the stories that we went through related to the fact that you can't actually change the volume or the sound settings of your game, like the background volume, the Pokemon cries, the sound effects, unless you get an item from an NPC character that isn't even part of the main happy path of the game. So instead of being like a normal game where you could just go straight into the menu, go straight into the options, and change the background music just because you don't like it or you don't want to hear it at that point, you can't do that unless you get to a certain point in the story so that you can interact with a certain character, certain side quests, so that you can unlock that setting, unlock that option. Very strange. So although Game Freak is making weird choices with their game design for Sword and Shield, I think this is rather not necessarily a poor choice. I would have loved them to have all new models, of course, but I think the poor decision making comes down to their conversing, their communication skills. I feel like this could have been talked over with the fans much smoother if they were willing to be a lot more open with what the choices they were making here. I would have been way more upfront early on in saying we are going to use some of the models from the older games. I don't think they wanted to have that bad look back then, because I feel like the community was hot. They were in an uproar for most of the summer actually over Sword and Shield, and I don't think they wanted to stoke the fire any more than that was. But the result is that now you're leading up to the most critical days of this game. You know, we're days away from the public release, and every single day you're being hit and you're being knocked by some latest controversy. So let's see what the people have to say about this. Let's clarify and point out we aren't angry they reused assets. We expected them to do that. We're mad because they used better models and animations as justifications as to why they removed Mons from the decks. Exactly, like took the words straight out of my mouth, basically what I was just saying. The design decision doesn't necessarily bother me. Do I wish they were using better assets? Absolutely. Can I understand if they were making some sort of design engineering decision about why they needed to keep those assets? Yeah, it's the decision making. It's not decision making, sorry, it's communication. It's the communication. I feel like they could have gone over this smoother, and this guy's quoting it. I don't know if that's an exact quote. He's quoting it by saying better models and animations as being a quote that Game Freak said. I'm not going to put those words in their mouth, but I definitely remember reading something like that. I can see why there's such anger building around Modelgate or people getting upset over Game Freak saying that they lied. And we're going to get to that story in a little bit specifically, but this makes the Dexit excuse look even more ridiculous than it was. So people are clearly upset that there are confirmed models. Pokemon Sword and Shield confirmed models are reused from Nintendo 3DS games. Okay, so this is just an extension of that. I think I may have had two things in one there. Looked at two stories that were talking about the same thing. Again, the census seems to be this person saying unsurprising but still disappointing, and there were some people that really thought the models were remade. So this story built into a bigger story throughout the day-to-day, where I'm reading straight off of Nintendo Life. Pokemon fans get hashtag GameFreakLied trending as Sword and Shield drama intensifies yet again. So this idea that Game Freak lied to people by saying that the models were one of the reasons why they decided not to bring all of your favorite Pokemon back into Sword and Shield, well, that doesn't seem to be the case with some of the evidence that we've seen. Is that evidence conclusive? No, absolutely not. I mean, we've only seen a few of the models. We haven't seen all of them. Maybe some of them, a portion of them have been updated. I don't know. It's hard to really pinpoint this on Game Freak. The only thing we know for sure at this point is that people are really, really upset about these models, and rightfully so, because this shouldn't happen. Like, you shouldn't come out and communicate the way that you are, Game Freak, and say things like citing the 3D models and the resources and the work you have to do to get to Sword and Shield, and then have people be able to pick that apart so easily before the game even releases. I mean, they must have anticipated that this was going to be a big deal, that people were going to be very upset about some of these changes. It just doesn't seem like they've been handling it well. Okay, so here's a specific portion of the article here that kind of lends itself to this whole idea that they may have lied, quote unquote. The issue here is that Game Freak's Junichi Masuda, excuse me for potentially not pronouncing that right, once listed the use of higher quality animations in the new games as one of the reasons behind the incredibly controversial National Pokédex cut. And they also confirmed that the choice was made thanks to Sword and Shield's models being created from scratch. I'm going to dive into these specific quotes to maybe refamiliarize us about what they're talking about here. Considering the quality, so this is a direct quote from an interview that was from, when are we talking about, July, with the Pokemon developers, where the question was asked, considering the quality of graphics in Pokemon Sword and Shield, it certainly would require considerable time to do that kind of work for every Pokemon. Response to that being, I was personally sad about this decision. Of course, had it been feasible, I would have liked to make it possible to bring every Pokemon into the game. However, this was a choice we needed to make sooner or later in the end. Okay, so Masuda doesn't necessarily say anything about the models, so let's read the second part of this. Masuda and I discussed the issue a great deal, even for Pokemon Sun and Moon. It was quite a difficult situation. Now that we are moving to the Nintendo Switch and remaking the models from scratch, there you go. There you go. They specifically say remaking the models from scratch. We had to make some kind of choice. That said, despite the limitation of the Pokemon that can be brought into the game's wild areas, okay, etc., etc. I don't know. I think that just kind of sucked the air out of me with that one, remaking the models from scratch, straight from, I mean, I guess it's translated if I want to continue playing devil's advocate, but I don't think there's anything more that I can do to defend this. If they're going to specifically cite remaking the models from scratch as being a direct quote as why they had to make a difficult choice, like not including all the Pokemon in there, when in reality, there is pretty much conclusive proof that they are at least using the same exact design for the models, such that the polygon count and the triangle count is almost identical and the look is almost identical. Whether or not they remade them needlessly is up in the air. I guess that could be possible, but no matter what, it doesn't look good. Oh man, okay. I don't know. This is a unfortunate part of the Pokemon Sword and Shield controversial saga at this point, and I don't know what we can do about it. Let's see what people are saying about the GameFreakLied hashtag. Also, lots of people have been talking about it today. 22,000 people just about on Reddit. Let's Go will be for casual and new fans, says one person. We'll bring a new generation in for 2019 for a solid Pokemon experience. I'm not quite sure what he means by that. We'll keep moving on. Not at all bothered that they reused the models, but using it as an excuse to cut the roster. Okay, this lying about it is poor form. So again, it's just people being really upset that it seems like they said at one point, and they definitely did, right? They definitely hinted at this idea that Game Freak was not willing or not able to make that tough choice and include all the Pokemon in the game because of resource constraints. One of the reasons being because the models were being remade from scratch. And to get to this point and seeing the models not be remade from scratch, be very similar to older generations, is quite surprising for the community. I understand it. I really do. I don't know what else how else we can cover it at this point. I'm curious to know what you guys think about all of this. Are you joining in on this idea that Game Freak is not looking very great right now? They're looking like liars at this point, according to the community. Or do you think that they do have some valid reason for making the decision that they did? I mean, they had to have had some logic, right? Some logic behind it. I still, and I've said it already multiple times in this show, I still maintain that Game Freak's biggest mistake is communication. That they really fumbled the ball here. That if they were more willing to open up in June or whatever, when they started talking about Sword and Shield and all of the issues that National Dexgate not having all the Pokemon Sword and Shield potentially brought into the fray, if they just had started talking about some of these things earlier, we would not be running into what has been a continuous string of controversial hit pieces over and over the past like couple weeks at this point, and it's sure to continue as more people get their hands on Sword and Shield and actually get to experience it and see the different decisions that they made, which, I mean, there's bound to be more at this point. I mean, I would be surprised if I don't wake up tomorrow and see another story, because that's how frequent it's been hitting. But let's move on to maybe a more positive note about Pokemon Sword and Shield. A couple more positive notes, actually. Game Freak is excited to see how Pokemon Sword and Shield players respond to the wild area's camera. Okay, the camera specifically, I guess that's just because it's one of the first times in a Pokemon game where you get to control the camera more freely. That's been a criticism, or at least maybe not a criticism, but a suggestion, a design suggestion for generations now, of why can't we move around or look around the scenery with a three-dimensional camera, with a camera that actually rotates and it doesn't stay stagnant. Ever since the series kind of made the transition from 2D to 3D, it's been something that's been talked about regularly by the community. And although Sword and Shield isn't going to get that throughout the entirety of the game, it is going to get something like that in the wild areas, the little pockets in the game that are supposed to be more open, more freeing. You're supposed to be seeing like Pokemon roam around, like the actual models, the reused models, floating around, moving around. You walk into them, interact with them, just like Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu, Let's Go Eevee. This section where you can build camps and make what is it, curry? I think it's curry, something weird like that. That's what they're talking about here. So let's read the direct quote. "We always want to come up with new surprises for our players with each new Pokemon game." Sorry, I just have to stop there because I think that's so funny that a camera that moves around the player in three-dimensional space is referred to as a new surprise. Like, literally something that's been in the Nintendo lexicon since Super Mario 64 on the N64 decades ago is a new surprise. Sorry, okay, I'm sorry. This is our first time introducing free camera movement in the series, so we are excited to see how our players will respond to it once they get their hands on the games. We'll think about what we want to do in the future based on those reactions. I mean, it's cool. It's cool that they're pushing the boundaries in some way, even though they're taking baby steps, right? They obviously didn't design an entire game with this new camera. And they didn't have like a massive jump in concept or in theme like you would assume, or like as it is evident by Skyward Sword to Breath of the Wild. That's a really good example of a game development team going back to the drawing board and really trying to revolutionize the franchise. That's not what Game Freak is doing. They're taking baby steps for sure to get where they need to go, and so they have a small pocket of their game where they have a camera that's honestly been in the industry for so long now that it shouldn't be a new surprise like they call it, but I get it. It's a new surprise for the Pokemon franchise. It's exciting for them. It's exciting for Pokemon fans specifically to be able to experience the world in a different way. I think the irony here is that Game Freak might be excited to see how people react to this little test, this little change, but everyone seems to care a lot more about some of their other decisions that they did not focus a lot on. It's almost I would almost venture to guess that the majority of people who are angry and upset about some of these decisions, like not having the Pokemon and all the Pokemon in the latest Sword and Shield game, would have rather just had those Pokemon instead of having the ability to move a camera around a little bit, in these pockets. I feel like that's a trade-off they would have made. So I think that's the unfortunate irony here, the unfortunate situation that Game Freak finds themselves, where they are really looking forward to some of these design changes that they see as being a step forward. Again, I would argue it's a baby step forward, but a step forward in the franchise when everyone else is kind of focusing on other things. If you ask me, the one decision that they made with Pokemon Sword and Shield that I think is going to have potentially the greatest impact on the Pokemon franchise for me is the rating, is the multiplayer, the co-op multiplayer. I think that's really cool. I want to get more understanding of what that means, and I'm excited to try that out. And not necessarily these wild areas, and definitely not the ability to turn my camera around. I think that should just be standard in Pokemon games at this point, but baby steps, right? Which brings us to our major piece of Pokemon Sword and Shield, major and last piece of Pokemon Sword and Shield news for today's show, tonight specifically, and that is the review thread. We're gonna go over some of the highlights of the reviews. If you don't want to know absolutely anything, again, I'm not necessarily going to purposely look for spoilers, but I am going to read some highlights from the reviews to get a taste of what people think. I have not looked at these at all. I don't know what anyone thinks about the reviews of Pokemon Sword and Shield. I don't know what the Metacritic score is. Nothing. This is completely fresh to me. So we're going to take a little bit of a dive into what the general litmus test is, what the pulse is on Sword and Shield, at least through the critics. What do the critics think? What do the game journalist sites think about Sword and Shield? What do the YouTubers think? It looks like on average there is an 81% recommended over 21 reviews. That seems like a really low number of reviews. 21 for a game as gigantic as Pokemon, for a franchise as big as Pokemon. I would have expected so many more reviews to come in. 81%, that feels on the low side. I mean, I get it. It's a good average. It's above 80, so you're in the B- ish range, which isn't necessarily something to be upset about. And I didn't expect Pokemon Sword and Shield, or really any Pokemon game, to be in the high-ish 90s, but 81%, that seems so dangerously close to 70. Let's pull out some choice quotes here. EGM, they say the first new generation Pokemon game to release on a proper home console does not disappoint. New features like Dynamaxing and the Wild Area are fun additions that make the experience of becoming a Pokemon champion still feel fresh. It's just a shame that Game Freak didn't lean into the new features more than they did. See, that worries me a lot. I wish I hadn't read that, because ever since I've seen Dynamaxing as a great example and Gigamaxing, it just kind of looked like a gimmick. It just kind of looked like the latest iteration of Z moves or Ultra moves. I mean, they have like a new version of this every generation. And it's cool every, once or twice, but it never really fully integrates itself to the core formula of Pokemon. And that's why it never sticks. And that's why they always have to do something new next time. It never becomes part of the fabric. It doesn't weave itself into the Pokemon franchise as much as I would like it to. So for Ray here from EGM to say that these new features are fun, they're just not leaned into at all, makes me think that they're inconsequential. Makes me think that they're just kind of eye candy type things, that we're going to play the game, we're going to Dynamax a couple times, and then we're just gonna kind of forget about it because it's not going to really feed into the core gameplay loop in any super significant way. I mean, I know you have to do it for that specifically, Dynamaxing and Gigamaxing. You have to use those tools in gym battles, but still, it seems like it's going to be inconsequential just going off of Ray's review. Let's go to Eurogamer. Pokemon Sword and Shield add some brilliant new creatures, but like their gargantuan Dynamax forms, the games feel like a hollow projection. Well, okay, the first part, great news, brilliant new creatures. That's pretty exciting, I would say. I think the designs I've seen for Pokemon Sword and Shield have actually been a lot better than for new Pokemon, have actually been a lot better this time around compared to older generations. So it's good to see that reaffirmed by Chris's review. But to feel like a hollow projection, that sounds about right. That seems to be where the pulse of the community is right now, and he is kind of confirming that. Who else do we got? Game Explain, video review, quote, not available. Thank you, Game Explain. Apparently they liked it, and that's good. I like the Game Explain guys. Not enough time to watch their video, not on this show, but maybe later. IGN, Casey DeFritas, she loves Pokemon. She absolutely does. She talks about it all the time in Nintendo Voice Chat. An amazing show and podcast. One of my favorite Nintendo shows besides this one. Don't leave this one. Keep watching this one. Watch the other one later. She says Pokemon Sword and Shield are the best games in the series, streamlining its most tedious traditions without losing any of the charm. She gave it a 9.3 out of 10. Honestly, that seems like one of the highest scores I've seen on this entire review thread. Again, maybe I shouldn't be surprised. I don't want to get into bias conversations, but she really does love Pokemon, and that should be considered, but that doesn't invalidate her opinion whatsoever, Casey's opinion on this one. It's nice to see that she enjoyed it so much. I'm glad that that's happening. It makes me really happy that she thinks that it's streamlining its most tedious traditions, because that's one of the things that bothers me the most about Pokemon games when they come up with new ones, is that like a lot of times they tend to kind of stingently grab on and hold on to the old ways of things, as opposed to trying to innovate and trying to keep things fresh. And I love it when Pokemon games decide to kind of like push away some of the old stuff to modernize the games and make them feel a lot smoother, a lot better, a lot less cumbersome, better to play. And it seems like that's where she's going with that one. Let's look at one more. Polygon. Or no, let's purposely look at a lower score to get a more painted view of the reviews, because we just looked at a 9.3 to 10. So let's balance that out by looking at a man, there aren't that many low scores. Yeah, let's look at this 3 out of 5 from Daily Star. That's okay. It's kind of low-ish. Pokemon Sword and Shield are not bad games. See, they're not bad, but fun character arcs are inventive. Creative designs of new Mon are often offset by poor pacing and restrictive world design. Whoops, those wild areas don't seem to be going well for Dom here. The world of Galar is charming, and is a Pokemon interpretation of Britain I've dreamed of since I was a kid, but between gating what Pokemon you can catch behind gym badges, some half-baked route city designs, and a modest amount of post-game content, Sword and Shield can only be called good Pokemon games, not great ones. Okay? I mean, honestly, these could be reviews for Pokemon Sun and Moon. These could be reviews for Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon. These could be reviews for Pokemon Black and White. Like, that's the feeling I'm getting from looking at these reviews. It just feels like the latest Pokemon has released. And there are some people who really like the new shiny thing and think that it's really fun. And there are some people who say, it's Pokemon and it's okay. And that seems to be pretty consistent with Pokemon games that have released in recent years. And take what you will from that. If you were expecting, as far as these people are concerned, now I haven't played it. I will play it. I will have a review on the YouTube channel, and we'll get more into that. But as far as these people are concerned, if you were expecting a brand new take on the franchise, this ain't it, Chief. Like, you're not gonna get this here. You're not getting a fresh revolution in the same vein as Breath of the Wild or Mario Odyssey or Fire Emblem Three Houses. Nothing like that. So you're going to get another Pokemon. It's another Pokemon game. It's the next incremental step in the Pokemon franchise. It has a little bit of new. It actually takes away some of the old, and that's what you get. You get some new Mon. But let's finish off this Pokemon conversation with what I think was a really adorable story. Jumbo Snorlax joins the Pokemon Build-A-Bear range, and now I have a reason to go back to Build-A-Bear. Something that I never thought I would do, to be honest. Catch the biggest Z's ever when you add jumbo-sized Snorlax to your Pokemon lineup. It's jumbo, 60 centimeter size makes this extra large Build-A-Bear Snorlax one of the snuggliest Pokemon around. Okay, so I know if you're not watching this, if you're listening to this, you can't see how adorable this looks, but God, this stuffed animal looks so adorable. And the picture that I'm looking at here is a Snorlax that is pretty well done. Definitely looks cute as a Snorlax as a really fat, round Pokemon can look. Is the size of this little child, like it literally almost the same height as this little child sitting down, and it's an adorable picture. And even though this is definitely not meant for someone of my age, I want it. Okay, and let's get to the final story of the show. A fun story, a good story, not Pokemon related whatsoever. So if you haven't been interested in Pokemon so far, you probably tuned out, to be honest. But we got Yacht Club Games, the creators of Shovel Knight, one of the best indie games of last generation. Definitely still stands up in this generation. I bought Shovel Knight 3 times at this point. I mean, I bought it for the Wii U, I bought it for the 3DS when it originally came out, and I had to buy it for the Switch so that I could play it wherever I was, because I was carrying my Switch around. And the final DLC that people have been waiting for, Shovel Knight King of Cards, arrives December 10th. We have a release date, folks. Yes, this is amazing. This is so great. The reason why this is so significant and I want to share it with you guys is because it's been set to release this year forever, and it's been TBD. It's been to be determined. There hasn't been a solid release date for Shovel Knight King of Cards for a long time. And as we moved into the fall, I was convinced, absolutely convinced, that this was going to be delayed. I mean, you don't move into October or September and October having a TBD 2019 release date and have that actually have a date at that point. That's usually a really bad sign. That's a tell that you're not going to make your deadline. But I'm happy to say, and actually Yacht Club is happy to say, it's not going to be the case. You can play not only Shovel Knight Showdown, which is a different thing. I actually think it's a completely different game that's kind of similar to Super Smash Bros. But in Shovel Knight form, I don't remember exactly. More importantly, King of Cards, the final DLC to Shovel Knight, will come out on December 10th, and I'm sure / hoping that they'll have a bundle with all of them in there. If you have not played this game, you should. If it at all interests you, I mean, look it up, see what the gameplay is like. It's like an old school Super Nintendo inspired platformer game that has inspirations from all the classics, or many classic SNES games from that era, but modernized, but brought into today's design sensibilities, and it just feels great. It's one of those games that doesn't necessarily feel like an SNES game. It feels like how you remember SNES games to feel. It hits that nostalgia factor right on target, and I am very much going to be playing Shovel Knight's King of Cards when it arrives on December 10th. And folks, that's it. That's all the news for the night. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Nightly Nintendo Show. We have one more, right? Today's Wednesday. We have 2 more episodes. We have tomorrow's episode. It's going to go live again on Twitch at Twitch/Nightly Nintendo. That's the channel where you can tune in. You can join in the conversation at 4:30 p.m. Again, same time on Friday, same place. If you can't catch it there, you can always go on YouTube, type in Nightly Nintendo Show. It should be under the Heart Containers YouTube channel, or you can find it on podcasting services like iTunes and Spotify. Thank you so much for joining me and talking to me about all this Pokemon craziness. Who knows what we'll see in tomorrow's news stories, maybe even some more Pokemon stuff. Probably. I mean, at this point, I absolutely would not be surprised. But I wish you all a very, very good night.